Welcome to today's webcast presentation, Defining and Implementing Competency and Job Frameworks in SAP. We're delighted to have you with us. The webcast is scheduled for 60 minutes, which includes about 15 minutes at the end for questions and answers. My name is Damien Williams, and I will be moderating today's webcast. If you are new to our webcast series today, then I hope we meet your expectations. A few housekeeping matters before we start. To toggle between full screen and meeting mode, please click on the blue square button at the top right-hand side of your control panel. Phone lines are muted by default due to the large numbers on the webcast and the interference that would result. If you are having technical difficulty, please submit a question in the Q&A section. A recording of this presentation and a copy of the slides will be made available to you to share with your colleagues in the next few days. The webcast is global, with presenters in the UK and the US, so please forgive us if there are any small breaks in flow between transitions. It can also take up to 3 seconds to transmit content to screen. On to our objectives for today. The objectives are to provide you with the importance of properly defining your competency and job framework, to learn some of the biggest challenges organizations face transitioning to a global competency and job framework, discover what is possible with SAP Enhancement Pack 4 technology, and see demonstrations of the latest job architecture and how the global competency and job model integrates with other talent management functionality in SAP. And finally, we're going to give you some tips and tricks and find out the pitfalls to avoid. Ultimately, we want to ensure your time invested is well spent. A little bit about Towers Watson and ROC, two focused organizations that are committed to human capital management. Towers Watson is a global professional services organization helping organizations improve performance through effective people, risk, and financial management. With deep and broad expertise in HR function effectiveness, advising more than 3/4 of the Fortune 1000 and other large global companies, as well as conducting extensive research. ROC is an SAP accredited service partner with a 100% focus on SAP human capital management, including payroll services and talent management. We have consultants delivering SAP HCM projects all over the world, helping organizations achieve global harmonization through the use of SAP human capital management. Together, our organizations bring true end-to-end HCM expertise. A little bit about our presenters. Today's presenters are Elise Friedman from Towers Watson and Nina Odu from ROC. Elise is a senior consultant in the talent management group for Towers Watson Worldwide. She has a strong history of successfully leading large-scale talent management and change initiatives in a wide range of Fortune 1000 and public sector clients. Her expertise includes all areas of talent management as well as leadership development and training, change management, organizational effectiveness, and workforce planning. Elise has specific experience including financial services, manufacturing, utilities, high-tech, pharmaceutical, healthcare, and federal agencies. She has presented at conferences for the Society of Human Resources, American Society of Training and Development, Linkage, World at Work, and a number of other organizations. Elise also presented on our last webcast. Nina is a senior solution architect at ROC, where she serves as the lead for SAP Talent Management with ROC Americas. She has over 16 years experience of HR, the last 8 of which have been working with SAP HCM. Nina is a frequent speaker at SAP and ASUG events. In fact, some of you may have met Nina at the recent HR 2010 conference in Orlando, where she presented in the talent management stream. Her experience includes projects in a global environment with responsibility for design, configuration, and implementation. Nina says herself that she enjoys the challenges of consulting. Nina was quoted as saying in a recent interview, "Looking back, not one specific engagement stands out as being the toughest. And when she's not consulting, she is either kayaking or knitting, or both at the same time." Welcome, Elise and Nina. With regards to interaction, there will be, as usual, a 15-minute question and answer session at the end. Please submit your questions in the Type Your Question area as we go through the webcast. Your questions are not viewable by other attendees. Technical questions will be addressed as soon as possible, and questions relating to today's topic will be addressed, time permitting, during the question and answer session at the end of the webcast. There is a survey that will appear at the end of the webcast, and if you are able to complete that, we will be able to forward you the Towers Watson Executive Summary Survey results. The webcast is one of a series from ROC and Towers Watson, and the next one will be on Thursday, the 27th of May, 2010. Now, without any further delay, let's move on to today's presentation. Over to you, Elise, to set the scene.
Great. Thank you, Damien. I think as we're all very well aware, the world has been changing. It's changing in various ways, and it's affecting what it's going to take to lead in the future. So let's talk about some of the things that are impacting us and basically what we need to think about as we're looking at developing and growing our leaders and our organization. Leaders cannot rely on their old trusted ladders and their old behavior. Instead, leaders need to look really at a different skill set to make sure that it's successful in this new global environment with the economic challenges that so many of us have been facing over the last couple of years. And even though some of us have had actually sometimes better or more successful financial results because of the economy, it's all impacted employees and organizations in one way or another. So if we look at the next slide and talk a little bit about what we actually did the research on at Towers Watson, we're going to talk about what it will take to lead in the future. And basically, just about 6 months ago, we did a research study with global leaders across 85 high-performing organizations. Each organization had a minimum of 1,000 employees, and much were much, much larger, and average revenues of $21 billion in U.S. dollars. There were 4 regions represented: Asia Pac, Europe, Middle East and Africa, Latin America, and North America, and over 15 different industries represented. And what we asked and predicted are as follows. And before I actually even get into what we asked and what we predicted, I've heard and I see from different clients different definitions of competency. So let me start and talk about how we at Towers Watson are defining competencies. When we say the word competencies, we're actually referring to a cluster of knowledge, skills, and abilities and other personal characteristics. An example of a competency is resiliency or communication skills. So we basically asked 3 questions in this research study. We looked at the recent past and the competencies needed to be successful in the recent past. We looked at the present economic downturn and the competencies that were needed to get through it. And then we also looked at the future and what competencies will be needed or will be different than needed currently. And our results were rather interesting. If you look at the slide, on the next slide on what we found, you will see that we posed the 3 questions, and basically the check marks mean that we were correct in our predictions, and the red X actually means that we were wrong or a little bit off base on our prediction. So let's talk about what that means. Basically, in question 1, we looked at the recent past and the competencies needed to be successful in the recent past, and we proposed that they were going to be different, and we were fine, different and similar. And basically, the competencies reported are similar to competencies that were needed in the past, but things have changed. And when we look at the present economic downturn and the competencies needed to get through it, while a lot of the old competencies that we found were important, they were actually maybe similar in name. The way they were described was markedly different. To overcome the current tumultuous environment, leaders needed new competencies and really new combinations of competencies than in the past. And then we looked at the future. We thought, well, maybe things will go back to the way they originally were before the economic downturn. But what we actually found is that a lot of the same competencies needed to get us through this last challenging 18 months are the ones that are going to be needed in the future. If we move to the next page, let's talk about why that is. And basically what we found is that the competencies needed to lead in the future are going to be different than required to survive in the past. We found that competencies and the requirement of leaders are changing in very fundamental ways, and that the changes in competencies happening today will be persistent and remain important while leading in the future. We found that the way that competencies are described is changing along 4 specific dimensions: speed, complexity, accuracy, and scope. And to be more specific, more is required of leaders today So the behaviors associated with each competency reflects a higher demand for speed and accuracy and addresses growth and complexity in scope. There will always be certain leadership competencies that were important in the past that will remain important in the future, but our findings suggest, and again consistent with a number of other research studies, that the competencies and contexts are changing and they require new, never before seen competencies and a combination of competencies. And the leaders that were interviewed during our study highlighted a number of factors driving these changes in competencies. Let's take a deeper look at some of these drivers. So if we move to the next slide, I think some of these you can just kind of naturally make sense. Competition. Basically, there's fierce competition out there now. Inching past competitors is not sufficient. Change is happening more and more and faster, and leaders must move a workforce to make changes much quicker than required in the past. Economic and financial factors are driving changes to strategy and process. Basically, in the old days, a lot of us maybe had one backup plan or contingency plan A, but now many organizations are going with contingency plan A, contingency plan B, contingency plan C. So depending on what the economy does, this is how they need to look at their business. Leaders repeatedly expressed that previous and current business models were and are not as effective sustaining growth and achieving desired ends. Businesses must rethink their models to be successful in the future and challenging really their own paradigms in the way they've typically done business. Contingency planning and long-term sustainability are paramount, increasing in importance. The past was marked by a focus on short-term gains and results, and that's especially true those of us living on Wall Street. It was all about the quarter and reporting out the quarter. But as the current downturn caught a number of businesses by surprise, there are higher demands and public and shareholder expectations on a long-term balance of implications of action. So not only getting through the quarter, but we're doing what's good for the organization overall and for the longer term. So balancing short-term gains with long-term sustainability is challenging because they're competing demands. And basically, there's lots of things that need to be considered. So we have a need for quick, decisive action to seize growth opportunities versus time-intensive, critical to properly evaluate and balance the long-term risk of potential actions. So an inherent push and pull going on at the same time. Economic factors are also driving changes on how work is done. Expectations around what should be achieved through creativity and innovation have increased. Leaders must find new ways to find people to work together and find new synergistic opportunities to create products and services that can be combined to have a dramatic effect. Cost-effective innovation, doing more with less, can only come through better knowledge sharing and collaboration. Again, really pushing on the need for teamwork, integration, creativity. We all know that our worlds have dramatically changed with the onslaught of Twitter and blogging and social networking, and real-time data channels can be conflicting and unreliable, requiring a need to quickly find out what's going out there and also being able to synthesize and analyze complex information. We've also honestly had some challenges with previous leaders' missteps. The media has flashed corporate irresponsible around the world and really holding all of us a lot more accountable for achieving business results and doing it in an ethical way. Also, an increased focus on long-term sustainability is another example of a higher expectation, which we mentioned previously. And then also a new type of transparency and integrity in communication that was not previously expected, whether it was internally or externally. We also are struggling with a downtrodden and demoralized workforce. The economy, again, even if someone's job ended up being safe, they're seeing, the retirement investments depleted. They've seen friends and other colleagues lose their job. They've seen benefits cut back, lower salary increases, lower bonuses. So folks out there are frustrated and nervous, and we've got to deal with that when thinking through what competencies does it take for leaders to be successful in the future. So let's talk about what is the same on the next slide. So again, as I mentioned, there's always a set of competencies going to be needed today and tomorrow, and some of them continue to be important. The leaders interviewed in our research frequently made references to the following 9 competencies important for contributing to past success and for overcoming current business challenges. And those are things like the strategic vision, knowing the business, a global perspective, change leadership, adaptability, creativity and innovation, communication, customer focus, and integrity and collaboration. The need for that hasn't changed, and again, that's supported in a number of other research studies. So let's talk a minute now. So we've talked about kind of what stayed the same. Let's talk a moment about new competencies and the new behaviors required of leaders in order to overcome current challenges and, most importantly, to lead in the future. So if we move to the next slide, what is different and new? There's this idea, this concept, and kind of a new competency that arose in the workshop we call vaulting. And basically, vaulting is about strategically positioning skills required in the new world of work. It's about rapidly taking bold and novel steps to solve complex problems, and it's about making connections very quickly and looking at complex trends and figuring out how to take appropriate action. Again, it's the speed and the pace that continue to take, and the fact that, again, we've got to do that with conflicting information. One of the next competencies we found, again, which was new and different, on the next slide. And also, it looks like my slides are a couple behind, so I'm just going to pause for a minute to see if folks can catch up. We should be on the what is different and new slide, slide 17. And the slide that I wish to be talking about is around the concept of perfect enough. Basically, perfect enough is the concept that even when you're doing things that are well, there's so much time sometimes it can be lost when you're trying to get everything 100% perfect. And it's basically the ability to identify when situations don't require perfect outcomes and when continuing additional work would result in diminishing returns. And that's challenging, and again, depending on the field and the role, that could be a little different. If we're talking about the FAA, who's guiding in our planes to land us safely, perfect enough isn't good enough. It needs to be perfect 100% of the time. But when you're talking about product development and marketing plans and other things, it's like it's got to be fast and it's got to be good, and it doesn't always have to be 100% perfect. If we move on to the next competency, I'd like to talk about some of the new behaviors that are also making up some of the competencies that we're seeing. The whole concept of social networking, blogging, and tweeting. Leaders made reference to the challenge and the benefits of social networking and blogging and tweeting. These real-time data channels that can have conflicting, unreliable information, and they can be used both positively or negatively. It's a way to spread information about the company. Again, when it's good information, that's great. But when it's negative information, the ability to deal with it obviously becomes a concern. Leaders are challenged not only on how to synthesize the information gathered from these channels, but must also determine how to best leverage these resources for marketing and competitive gain, and as well as address customer feedback and potentially negative publicity. Also, more and more employees are using these tools, again, whether they're formally endorsed or not endorsed by the organization. So every competency model should make reference to social networking, blogging, and tweeting. These technological trends should be reflected in multiple competencies, such as things like networking and relationship management and written communication. The world has changed, and our competency models need to change right along with it. If we look at the next slide, there's also some interesting things that have come up. It's the concept of really working in the trenches. Leaders now are describing how they're working right alongside their employees a lot more now than in the past, replacing the idea of entitlement and charismatic leadership with an emphasis on accountability and results. And this change in expectation is reflected in the competency of humility. There's also this psychological, transitioning from work to personal life. We've often talked about work-life balance and the end state that we all strive for. Some of us are probably more successful than others. But the reality of a global technical world that's become 24/7, instead of talking about creating pockets of work time and personal life, leaders talk about seamlessly transitioning from one to another without disruption, showing flexibility and adaptability to ever-increasing demands. If we move to the next slide, let's talk about the challenge and implication for organizations. Basically, it's time to change. It's time to refresh. There are a dearth of critical skills needed to lead in this new business reality. New competencies are needed, new behaviors are needed underneath these competencies, and many of us have competency models that have been created 5, 10 years ago, and some even the last couple of years ago, but before some of these recent challenges. So we really need to take a look at them and make sure that what our current leadership needs is accurately reflected in that leadership model. With the right focus on talent management and leadership development, you can have the leaders in place ready to be able to challenge or to take on these challenges and to leap over larger hurdles than ever. And there continues to be a growing concern of leadership shortage. Even with the challenging economic, we've got some challenges. Employees today who are promoted to leadership roles are younger, less experienced, but more educated. The effect has been compounded by the globalization of the workplace. In countries like China and India, economic growth has created more leadership opportunities than there are experienced local leaders to fill them. The result has been significant increases in pay for the most talented, experienced, and high-potential leaders at companies. So more and more companies are competing for the same talent. And while we can compete on compensation to some extent, the madness will have to stop. And we'll need to really take a hard look at what we need to do to engage and grow and develop our talent and keep them for the longer term. One thing that actually really made me nervous for both Towers Watson and our clients was looking at the way that things have changed and that top performers' engagement fell by 23% in the past year. Well, if you think about it, that's not a huge surprise due to cost-cutting and restructuring, and these are people who have typically been high performers and used to the higher bonuses and rewards, and maybe even so being more in the know. So this is scary because the people we need the most to take us into the future are the ones that are more and more demoralized, and when the next good opportunity comes along, might be a lot more willing to jump ship now than they were in the past. And we found that more than 1/3 of top performers say their company's situations have worsened, and the percentage who said they'd recommend their companies to others fell by 20%. So what should we do about it and how to do it? Well, again, we need to look at our competency models, really evaluate our leaders on what is needed and see where the gaps are. We need to create development and succession plans to make sure that we're getting our leaders from where they are today and where they need to be tomorrow. We need to rethink how to build leadership capability through cost-effective methods. And we need to really prioritize and modify programs for the folks that are in our top talent pools or in the most critical positions. And we need to make sure we're constantly looking at these programs to make sure that they really are performing. So we're evaluating and looking for things like return on investment on our leadership development programs. We need to connect competencies to all aspects of talent management, especially career architecture and compensation and performance management and succession planning. And we need to ensure all components of an integrated talent management systems are reflecting the changing demands. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nina, who will talk about all this and how SAP can support it a little bit further.
Thank you, Elise, and thanks everyone for joining. I see a lot of familiar names and a few new names, and so we're really happy to have everyone here. And Elise, I mean, the point that you make about making sure your competency model is up to date is so key. And of course, I'm looking at it from a systems standpoint, and a lot of you folks know that it takes a lot of energy and effort to build that global competency model and job framework. But if you don't have a good process in place and governance structure to keep those models in evergreen, then it doesn't take long for that information to be out of date. So can totally identify with that need to always keep that information fresh. So we're going to change our focus now and bring it into the SAP world. And the first thing I'm going to start off with, though, is we're going to look at competencies. And competencies are really not new in the SAP world. And at least the definition that you provided with respect to competencies is very well aligned with how SAP looks at competencies. And the qualifications catalog has been around for quite some time, and it is truly that repository that's used to capture the skills and knowledges and abilities that are important to an employer. A lot of the functionality around the qualification catalog remains the same, so I think that's a good testimony to the foresight that SAP had in building out this fundamental structure that supports all of talent management in SAP. At the crux of what we're talking about today, competencies and via the qualifications catalog help us to define the actual responsibilities and the skills and the requirements for a particular role within the organization. It also helps us to quantify the skills and the abilities that an individual brings to the table. And competencies, they really do. I mean, and we've had several webinars that we've done in the past. So if you want to go back and take a look at ROC TV, you'll see the actual website at the end of this presentation. You'll be able to go in and see webinars on performance management and learning and development, and you're able to see how well the competencies and the qualifications catalog support all of those different activities. And so the underlying message there is that as you look at building out your competency model and your job framework, it's really key to look and bring in and solicit input from all stakeholders that are going to be leveraging that foundation piece. When we look at job framework, well, two main objects remain key, and those are jobs and positions. And if you're veterans in the SAP HCM world, then I'm sure you have a really good grasp of what jobs and positions do. But for folks that are fairly new to SAP HCM, it takes a while. It took me a while, several years ago, to grasp that concept. And I'm just going to spend a few seconds on jobs and positions. And jobs, they help to quantify a defined set of responsibilities and attributes. And I like to think about jobs as a job description. And it's fairly agnostic as to where that actual role will be carried out, and perhaps even who's going to be carrying out that role. So it really does kind of quantify what's required for this particular function in an organization. Now, jobs, they describe positions. And positions, if you will, are actually positions or boxes on your organizational chart. In this diagram here, or this illustration, we have a flight instructor job. That describes the responsibilities of being a flight instructor, and it describes the positions for a Houston flight instructor, a Brisbane flight instructor, and a Moscow flight instructor. And those positions are held by actual individuals or persons. Okay, so with Enhancement Pack 4, though, what we do have are more objects and more capabilities using standard SAP and building out that job architecture. Now, this isn't to say that job frameworks were not important to customers prior to Enhancement Pack 4. They were quite important, and many customers did develop job architectures. They did so by using custom PD objects or perhaps custom info types to get that framework in place that they needed. But with Enhancement Pack 4, 2 new objects have been brought into the job architecture, and they work with jobs and positions. We have the functional area. The functional area is typically going to be at the highest level of your job architecture, and it's helped to use to group one or more job families. In the example that we're going to follow throughout this presentation, we have an aviation training organization, and we've defined flight training as a functional area. Along with flight training, you may see human resources. You may see simulator maintenance. So this is at the very highest level of a particular function within your organization. The job family, if we look at this example, we're looking at flight training 737. And the job family is used to group several jobs or even positions, if you will, that are similar in nature. Now, I do want to say one thing about Job Family. Technically speaking, Job Family is not brand new to the SAP world. It actually was introduced with ECC 6, and I was really excited when it did come out. But once we started using the Job Family, it was a little clunky. It didn't work in the way that HR looks at job families. So SAP listened, they heard, they reworked how job families support the job architecture, they introduced the functional area, and now we have a more robust way using standard configuration in building out a job architecture. Along with Enhancement Pack 4, Talent Visualization by Nikisa provides a very easy user interface in being able to work with your job architecture. The demo that we'll be showing in just a few moments is going to be primarily based on leveraging that Talent Visualization by Nikisa job architecture view. So very easy look and feel. This is a screenshot here of looking at a particular position within through the Talent Visualization by Nikisa interface. Or overlay, if you will. And another point, too, that's really key is that qualifications can get stored, or competencies can get stored on each level of the job architecture, and then they're inherited throughout that framework. And this is so key in really helping to streamline maintenance with respect to competency administration. And moving on, one other enhancement that's now available through Enhancement Pack 4 is that jobs and or positions can be easily flagged as key jobs or positions for succession and talent management purposes. And here again, we're looking at the position screen, and you can see on the Attributes tab how easy it is to be able to identify a particular job or position as key. Now the next diagram that I have, very, very simple diagram. I think hopefully it helps to ground everyone in what we're dealing with respect to the SAP job architecture. And to the left we see our 4 objects. We have functional area, job family, job, and position. And on the right we have an example working with our ACE training organization, aviation training organization, and we're just working through the flight training job architecture. So you can see at the highest level, flight training, and then we've broken down the job families, and for this example, we've broken down job families by actual aircraft model. There's so much flexibility. I mean, you have carte blanche in how you build this job architecture. So with that carte blanche, it really does require thoughtful planning in how you're going to break up and structure your job architecture. The job family, now what we're seeing below that with the purple, we're starting to see jobs align under the job family. And now we can see a 737 instructor, a senior instructor, moves on to a lead instructor, and so forth. I wasn't able to put it all on this because we're only doing with a slide here. But with the jobs now under the job family, we're starting to see kind of a career progression that aligns under a particular job family. And then again, we see positions that are aligned under a particular job. So we've got 2 positions here for this illustration, a 737 instructor in Houston and 1 in Brisbane. Now this is the last slide before we go into the demo, and I wanted to share this slide with you because I think it really helps to underscore the importance that a global competency model as well as a global job framework play in supporting an integrated talent management solution or technology solution. There's some other important foundation elements. Position management is really key. And then we have some enablers through employee self-service and manager self-service that help us provide a very integrated talent management technology landscape through SAP. SAP, I mean, all of the different talent management activities that you see at the top end of this slide are fully supported by SAP. And as we take a look at performance management, for instance, and being able to bring competencies into the performance plan, quite easily done. You can bring in competencies based on the person's current position that they're holding or role, or perhaps they're being groomed for another role. You're able to bring those competencies in. Same thing from a learning standpoint. You're able to tie a particular learning activity to a competency or a skill so that once an employee or an individual successfully completes that learning activity, their proficiency is raised or it's achieved. So again, this slide here I think helps to really just emphasize how important that global job framework and competency model are. And as you start working with those foundation pieces, it's key that you approach the integration from really making sure you're getting input from all of the key stakeholders. So I am now going to switch over to our demo for today, and what you're looking at here in just a moment, as soon as the screen refreshes, is the job architecture through talent visualization by Nikisa. And I just want to make sure that I'm showing my screen. Okay, I think you should start seeing it now. Apologies. And as we're working through the demo, what you're seeing, and I just want to make sure you guys are seeing it. So if someone could send me a note and let me know that you're seeing the demo, that would be great. Okay, I'm just going to keep on going. So as we take a look at what we're seeing in the demo here is talent visualization by Nikisa Job Architecture. And let me just stop real quick. So the screen is very user-friendly, and what we see is, I'm just going to get everyone grounded on the screen. So we see on the left, we see a job hierarchy. This is kind of our guide or our navigation, and on the right is our working area. So on the left, you can see in the drop-down menu, through this screen, we're able to work with our main 4 objects in our job architecture: job functional area, job family, job position. Here we're also able to create our functional areas and our job families. Jobs and positions are created in the same fashion as they are today. As we go through, you can see there's a help screen. Very helpful, especially if you're new to using the talent visualization by Nikisa. Good color-coded legend that helps us guide through and understand what are the different objects that we're working with. And as you can see, as you scroll down, you'll see a lot of different icons on this help tab that gives you guidance as to what you're looking at with respect to the different icons and symbols that you'll see through talent visualization by Nikisa. So moving on and looking at our job architecture hierarchy, what we'll see are different functional areas. So as you can see from the burnt orange color, these are all functional areas. We have administration, and then when we see, we're going to be working primarily with the flight training functional area. And by clicking on, when we go through, you're going to see as we click on a particular object, that's going to bring that particular object into our right side, the right side of our screen, which is our working area. And so what we've done, we've clicked on the flight training functional area, and now you can see the flight training functional area, and you're able to start working with it. You know, this is an actual, I mean, as far as who's going to maintain the job architecture, typically you're going to see this being a more centralized function because folks need to understand what the ramifications are when they do make changes. What I've done too is I've given my right side of my work area a little bit more room by sliding that bar between the 2 panels. Now, very simple screen, we can see 2 tabs. We see competencies and roll-up structure, and we're going to be primarily working with the competencies tab throughout this demo. You can see at the flight training functional area, we've assigned the instructional systems design competency, which is tied to the functional competencies category at that highest level. And remember, we said that you can tie competencies at every level, and then they're inherited down. So we're going to see this instructional systems design competency throughout the job architecture. We've defined a proficiency level of good, and we've also flagged this as an essential requirement in the flight training job architecture. The functional competencies category, there's actually some configuration that allows you to set categories of competencies or qualifications for talent management purposes. So it really helps you better leverage your qualifications catalog. Now, I've also clicked on the roll-up structure, and we're only going to do that once, but what you can see are the actual objects within the hierarchy that now roll up to the flight training functional area. And what you see here is we have a 737 job family, and we also see an A380 job family. If you need to add job families or remove them, this is where you do it. But as you can see on the left side with our hierarchy navigation screen, you can actually see the actual objects by clicking on the icon that's got the two arrows that are down. The two here is just letting us know that there's two child objects that report directly into the flight training functional area. So again, so we're going to work our way through, and we're going to continue working with the 737 group. And so I've clicked on the Flight Training 737 job family, and what we're going to see is it's going to come into, of course, our work area on the right. There's just a little bit of a lag here. It'll be there in just a couple of seconds. But here we go. And we'll see the screen refresh on the right. And we'll see it will start to work with our Flight Training 737 job family. It is a little bit sluggish on this little point. I apologize. But here it comes. Here we go. Okay. So the yellow, and if you were to refer back to the help, you would be able to recognize that this is, now we're working with the job family. And you can see the same two tabs, the competencies and the roll-up structure, so very similar experience as we work through the job architecture. You also see a new tab, Successor Pool, and this is where we're really starting to be able to integrate our job architecture for succession management purposes. And just as a note, there's been a lot of interest around succession management, so please look for an upcoming webinar around succession management. And you'll be able to keep an eye on those upcoming webinars through ROC TV, and then again, we'll ensure that you get a notification too when that comes out. If we take a look at the competencies, we can see at the bottom, we see our instructional systems design competency that we had assigned at the functional area. The icon to the left, the little link, that's an indication that that particular competency or qualification has been inherited through the job architecture. If we need to make changes, we can. Perhaps we want to change the proficiency level, or we want to say for this particular grouping that it's not an essential requirement. We can do that. We've also added now, or introduced at this level, a new qualification that's more relevant for the roles that will fall under this particular hierarchy, and that's the actual 737 Classic certification. You can see from the proficiency that it's a different scale that we're using. You either have this particular certification or you don't, whereas with the instructional systems design, it's a quality type-based scale. Going from good and then working itself up. And so that's to demonstrate that you have an unlimited number of scales that you're able to tap into to define proficiencies for your qualifications. We're going to continue and navigate down through the job architecture. Now what we see are jobs that are aligned to the Flight Training 737 job family. Looking back at our health and aligning, we can see that the purple aligns to a job. So what we can see here are different jobs that are 737 related. We can see flight training instructor, senior flight training instructor, lead, and chief. And as we think about it again, those functional competencies that have started at the flight training functional area are going to get inherited. So these roles have very similar qualities or requirements, job requirements. What we will see, though, as we move through that career path, if you will, is that as a role progresses, or as you progress through the roles from a junior on up through senior roles, while the qualifications may be the same, the level of proficiency that's expected at each different level is going to differ. So if I take a look at the Flight Training 737 job, now we're looking at a job. And what we can see at the bottom of the competency tab, the two functional competencies, the 737 Classic certification as well as the ISD qualification coming through. We're going to come back to these core competencies. As you recall, we haven't seen those competencies yet, but they are inherited. And I'm going to show you what we've done with the job architecture hierarchy to be able to bring in core competencies. Some organizations call them organizational competencies or foundational competencies. So again, we can see that the instructional systems design competency has been inherited, and the proficiency level is good. Now, moving over now to the lead flight training instructor job, we can see those same competencies, but please take a note that while the 737 Classic certification still remains the same, on the instructional systems design competency, we've actually upgraded the proficiency required to very good for a lead flight training instructor. Now, we're still working with the job. This is not assigned to any one particular person, but you'll see ultimately these particular competencies will then be inherited and brought down into the positions. Again, on the core competencies, you'll see in a moment how we've made some adjustments to our job architecture hierarchy to bring in these competencies that are around the way we expect our teams to work, regardless of what particular function they work in. They may be in operations, they may be in support, they may be in HR. It doesn't really matter, but we would expect teamwork and a certain level of communication skills to be in place. So I'll show you how we've brought these in just a few moments. We're going to continue down through the flight training flight training job architecture. On the attributes, one other thing too I'd like to point out here is you see the star next to the lead flight training instructor. Again, this is how we're able to define either a job or a position as key. And it's here on this attributes table. This is one of the things that you'll do on the attributes tab. And it's quite easy to be able to set the indicator for either a job or a position to be considered key for succession and talent management purposes. This tab, you're able to do a couple of other things. You can define a career path for this particular job. You can also assign job evaluation results at the job level. Okay, so now we're moving forward and we're going through the lead flight training instructor job. And now what we're going to see are all the positions. And we're going to see a multitude of positions that are aligned to this lead flight training instructor job. So within our global aviation training organization, we may have 3 instructors in Houston, and we may have 4 instructors in Brisbane. So they all are lead instructors, and they're all doing the same thing. So they're all of those positions are going to be tied to that lead flight training instructor job. We're going to take a look at the lead flight training instructor job, and this one's actually going to be based in Houston. And we've clicked on it. We're going to bring in the actual position and look at it through the job architecture. As you can see, this position has been deemed as a key position. So one of the things that you'll see in just a moment is there is now a place where we're able to start defining a succession plan. And again, keep an eye on that upcoming webinar for succession planning. We can also see the current incumbent, Victoria Agnew, is fulfilling this role there in Houston. We can also see those competencies that had been present at the job level have been inherited at the position level. So you can imagine how streamlined your maintenance is if you're able to assign the competencies at the job level and then or have those at the job level inherited by all those positions. You know, there's quite often you may have 50 people doing the same function within an organization, and it really does help to streamline the maintenance. Again, the attributes is where we're able to define whether the position is key or not, also define a career path and job evaluation results. Now, a little bit about the core competencies here. Again, we can see these core competencies coming across. And again, these are characteristics in the way we expect our workforce to work. And it doesn't matter what department you're in, we're expecting teamwork and communication. What we tend to see a lot of times, though, is that depending upon the level of a particular role, we're going to expect people at the higher levels to have more proficiencies in some of these organizational or core competencies or behaviors. And so what we've done with the job architecture, we've brought in a couple of new functional areas. We've brought in individual contributor and then management. And what we've done is we've built out a mini job architecture in these areas as well. And this is where we're tracking those behavior or those organizational competencies. We've defined different levels under the individual contributor. We would do the same thing from a management standpoint. Maybe you have 4 different levels of managers, and as a manager progresses through the management ranks, you're expecting more and more of those managers. And so we've placed at that individual contributor functional area these core competencies. And then as we progress through and someone moves up through the organization, we're going to expect more proficiency in how they work with others. Maybe they're helping lead teams and so forth. So I'm looking now at the individual contributor 4 job family, and you can see that lead flight training instructor job along with that lead accountant. They do very different functions, but as far as how they're working and those different behavioral characteristics that we expect from them, we expect them to be operating pretty closely at the same level. And so those core competencies are actually being inherited through this individual contributor job family. To be able to do this, we made a slight configuration change. We made a change on the time constraint so that a job can align to more than one job family. So that's the demonstration on competencies and job framework within the talent visualization by Makisa. I want to show you just a very, very, very quick
Hi, Nina, it's Damien here. Sorry, I'm just cutting in. We might just need to move past this demo and back onto the presentation just because of otherwise we're going to run out of time for questions.
Thank you.
I
can imagine. Okay. So, but again, when the succession management demo, webinar we'll be doing, please stay tuned for that. And so what we want to do now is we're going to switch over, hand it back over to Elise, and she's going to share with us a business case about a company that's had to undergo some assessments and make a change to their competency model. And then we're going to share with you quickly some tips and tricks on being able to, as you focus on competency models and job framework. So Elise, to you.
Hi. We just wanted to go ahead and take a moment to share an example of a case study we thought you might be interested because, like many of your organizations, companies have been kind of rethinking their business strategy. And we were working with a high-tech communications company that basically changed their business model from a product-based to a solution-based situation, and this meant that they needed new skills both from their employees and their leaders, and they actually conducted some analytics to identify which competencies actually predicted sales performance and customer satisfaction, and they identified those critical skills needed to be successful in the new marketing and sales model. Based on that, they actually determined what was new and different. They assessed the workforce to figure out where the gaps were and to understand who could be high performers in this new model. And they used this information to build skills among the average performer and develop better selection criteria and develop solutions for all incumbents. And actually, they did some analytics afterwards, and they determined that basically for them, that just a 0.5% increase in competency proficiency meant a 7% gain in sales. So a quite significant impact for them by actually identifying how their competencies have changed and developing their people across and against those competencies. So if we move to the next slide, and you guys are thinking about in your organizations how to both update your competencies and around technology, there's just some tips and tricks I'd like to share. And one of it is that you can never underemphasize the importance of change management and really looking at what you need to do and managing that process, getting engagement and support and buy-in from all your various stakeholders. Make sure that you leverage the experience you have internally, but this is also an area we'll partnering sometimes with external organizations who work with many companies to make this happen can also help you get there quicker, faster, and easier. It's always key to have key leadership involvement and executive involvement and support, and that ties back into the change management. And basically, in this area, I think even more so than others, while HR might play the role of the facilitator, they're not the doer. The competencies aren't owned by HR. They're owned by the organization and the business, and they need to be defined by the leadership teams with the functional competencies defined by the functional leaders. And you really need to have a balance around of the competency model to help achieve both, again, local objectives and personal objectives in development, as well as organizational and business strategy. And now I'm going to turn it back to Nina to talk about tips and tricks more from a technology perspective.
Thanks, Elise. And just a few other points too. When we start looking at a rollout approach, especially when we start looking at integrating this into your SAP system, really a phased rollout, we recommend a phased rollout approach. It's a lot of work, and trying to take on a full comprehensive framework rollout at the onset will most likely lead to an unfinished product. So being able to break it out, maybe focusing on organizational competencies and then piloting, with respect to functional competencies in a particular area is one way to be able to break it, to approach it in a phased approach. Again, the third bullet I'd like to point out again, it's so important to make sure that you have the right processes and the governance structure to make sure that your competencies and what you've defined with your SAP world remain fresh. Again, there's different ways that you can look at the job architecture to meet your particular needs. As I've shared with you earlier, just by making a slight configuration change, we're able to bring in kind of a different dimension into the job architecture framework there. And then again, when you think about the qualifications catalog and then the configuration that's used to introduce the competencies to employees, think about the end user and, as they're going through and they're trying to define what skills I bring to the table. Really, because those are the activities that are going to start to get exposed to a very, very broad population. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Damien.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Elise. That's a great session, and I'm sorry to the audience. We got a little bit of time left for Q&A. We may just run over 5 minutes, so if you have asked some questions, we'll try and get to those. I'm going to cut right in. Nina and Elise, if I can ask you to just keep your answers brief, that will allow us perhaps to address as many as possible. Elise, I've got a question for you, and well, actually, your organization, Towers Watson. Do you have an off-the-shelf competency framework available?
We do have an off-the-shelf competency framework that's quite robust and actually can be tailored and customized even by the client by partnering with Towers Watson.
Okay. Thank you. And also to yourself, Elise, from your experience, what is a reasonable number? This is actually a multiple choice question for you. What is a reasonable number of competencies to maintain in a corporate competence catalog, say 40, 400, 4,000?
and that's a great question, Damien, and I'm going to give that consulting answer that everybody hates, which is it depends. The higher level kind of organizational or competency framework, in my opinion, should be really no more than 10 to 12 competencies. Now, underneath them might be subsets of competencies, and also by the job and functional demands of finance, marketing, et cetera, you'll have a lot more competencies. But that overarching competency framework, when I've had clients that have 20, 30, and 40, it's just too hard to develop, folks. So they just need to pick the ones that are the highest priority and or cluster them more effectively together.
Okay. Thank you. Nina, can you flag a job as key without using SAP TVN or Nikisa, or without using Nikisa?
There is a transaction that you're able to use, and the transaction code is actually HTRMC_PPOM. It's a transaction that you access through the GUI, and you're able to make adjustments to your job architecture, including the ability to flag a position or a job. However, it's not as user-friendly, or it's just clunkier in comparison to what you're able to do through talent visualization by Nikisa.
Okay, thank you. That's actually answered another question that one of our attendees asked as well, so thanks very much. This one I think we addressed pretty much in the presentation about the job architecture making use of the inheritance concept, but you just confirmed that, Nina?
Yes, so inheritance plays such a key role throughout, and being able to maintain competencies, leveraging the job architecture. So as you can imagine, with that flight training, ultimately we may have 100 instructors and 100 positions. So if you're able to push those competencies and assign them at the highest level, and then leverage that inheritance principle, that's just going to make maintenance that much easier and that much more streamlined.
Okay, thank you. And is it a prerequisite to have Enhancement Pack 4 to make use of the job architecture?
If you want to use the standard, I mean, the functional area and the job family in the way that we've demonstrated today, yes, you do need to have Enhancement Pack 4 in place.
Okay, thank you. Elise, I'm just going to come back to you. I think these are a little bit more appropriate for yourself and your organization. What are organizations doing to integrate competencies into performance management and also compensation?
Some other good questions. There's a number of things companies are doing. First of all, I think actually recognizing that they really are a part of the equation, and it's factoring into someone's performance scale. Companies sometimes are doing different weighting, so your results/objectives might be 50%, and how you achieve those results and objectives might be 50%, or obviously 60-40, something along those lines. And then, therefore, then that factors into what percentages you're getting for merit and bonuses based on what your performance ratings are. So we're definitely seeing a lot more integration of competencies into the performance management rating, and therefore being integrated into whether it's salary increases and or bonuses.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question which either of you may answer, actually, around the functional hierarchy being split along the lines. Perhaps, Elisa, maybe yourself first. Do you see a functional hierarchy split along the lines of behavioral or sort of legally required / professional certification, or 3, technical, as in everything else, or do you have other standard architectures that are common?
You know, it's so different by company and by industry. You know, with certain industries where there's a lot more kind of legal certification, things are prioritized a little bit differently, like in the healthcare industry, for example. You know, there are set position requirements and standards that folks have to be held accountable for. In other organizations, professional services, you see actually the behavior parts of it come even more to play, because again, you might know your topic matter extremely well, but if you can't relate to clients and help translate that knowledge into something that's meaningful and useful to them, you're not going to be as effective as a consultant. So I can't actually say that I've seen one way more so than another as far as the hierarchy of importance. I think they're all important, and I think you really need to look at it based on level in the organization, type of industry, type of role, etc.
Okay, thank you. We have got a question someone's asked, sensing we are running out of time. We will try, if we don't answer your questions on the webinar, we will try and get them out to you in another way. So that's just for everyone's benefit before people drop off. In terms of, Liz, you might have mentioned balancing global and local needs.
Yep.
And just what your experience is and how you achieve that in a sort of common competency framework.
Well, first of all, I think one of the most important things is that when you're developing and or refreshing your competency model, it needs to be done globally. And there are definitely cultural differences that exist out there, and so ideally it's still working together to come up with a competency model that works in Asia as well as it works in Europe as well as it works in North America. So I think that's one of the most key points of doing it. And then from there, in some cases, the cultural differences are really different enough that you might have some different definitions, some different ways of developing, or you could potentially even have different competency models in different parts of the business. But it's ideal if you really can come up with one global competency model across the entire organization.
I'd like to just add a note on that one too. Sometimes we have customers that they're just based in the U.S. But they've grown in ways in which they may have acquired a business in another state or so. So I think that concept of global, while we're not maybe looking at a difference from a international standpoint, that same concept still applies.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of questions here which we'll just sort of maybe end up on. For companies who have implemented jobs based on compensation requirements, I'm not sure how common this is across organizations, for say multiple pay scales. I guess rather than how is there a way of advising to sort of reverse engineer the way that those have been set up to implement the new Enhancement Pack for Job Architecture? Is that something that either Towers Watson or Nina, that's something that ROC typically does?
Right. So yes, I mean, it would be interesting to get more information on how those jobs were structured in the first place. But if they were driven by compensation, then it's quite possible that those jobs were defined based on the actual requirements of the role and the actual responsibilities and so forth. So that might be driving the compensation. But then being able to integrate those jobs into the job framework, it's very feasible to do that.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that's probably a challenge a lot of organizations are facing as they sort of move into a newer style of competencies that are required. I'm just going to look at one last question here. Do any corporations use a roadmap approach when defining competencies, meaning you answer a number of questions which then narrows your set of competencies you're supposed to use for these cases? So I guess, Elise, this one's to you in terms of a methodology to help companies end up with a sort of a competency framework.
Yep, and there's a number of approaches. A roadmap approach works. So when I was talking about our off-the-shelf competency model, we have it in the cards where you get a group of people with mixed experience together and you prioritize which competencies are have to have, nice to have, more optional for various roles or levels depending on how you're doing it. So you can use a roadmap approach, you can use a card sorting approach, you can do a more complicated critical incident interviews, and so there really are a variety of different methods. The more critical incident type methodology, it's honestly probably too timely and too costly for most organizations. So most of them do use a roadmap or more of the card sorting type thing.
Okay. Thank you. For any questions which are sort of requested that we either contact you or follow up with some more information, we will be in touch. So don't worry about that. I think we have run out of time. There are about 5 questions I haven't got to. Apologies. We will basically answer those and send out a sort of a consolidated list. So thank you very much for your time. We hope to see you on the next webcast. We will be sending out details. Links to the recording of the webcast today will be sent to everyone. Obviously, if you would like to find out more on these subjects, then our contact details are available and will be coming on the screen in a minute, and we'll leave those up for a second. Looking to my technical team, thank you very much. And so finally, I'd just like to thank Elise and Nina. Really appreciate your time and expertise on today's call. And this concludes today's webcast presentation. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.